what's going on, guys? It's Mike from the Retrollectors with Danny. We're from the Retrollectors. We are in an amazing place. I'm so excited to be here, and so is Danny.
Long overdue.
Yeah,
right?
very long overdue.
Yeah.
He reached out to us early on into our videos and collecting days to come do a video here, and we're very, very happy and proud to be here. He took us to another location. It's amazing.
It's an overwhelming experience to see everything.
It's unbelievable. But without further ado, Syd Bolton.
Yeah, and we're big Commodore fans, so the Commodore has a bit more treatment than some of the other ones. So the Commodore stuff actually starts chronologically at the far back and moves up to Commodore's latest stuff. And of course, in addition to the computers, we have all the stuff that goes with it. So we have old posters, old merchandising materials, peripherals, little known facts. Like, for example, the video toaster here, this was the same equipment that was used to produce the special effects swipes on Home Improvement.
Yeah.
And was also originally done the graphics for Star Trek Voyager. So Lightwave was the software, which is still in use today, but it all started on the Amiga.
Wow.
How did you come across all this stuff? Like, how would you find all the bits and pieces, or
at the time, it would be in like magazines and stuff. This is before the web was really popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I used to buy all the magazines, and also like the company that produced it, I actually used to be a distributor for them in Canada. So they would promote that as, hey, look at our stuff. It's kind of cool. Like if you've ever watched Wayne's World with Mike Myers. Okay, so Dana Carvey is the other guy in the movie, right?
Yeah.
His brother is Brad Carvey.
Yeah.
He actually designed the hardware. He's a video graphics engineer.
Really?
Yeah. So in the second movie, you can actually see Dana Carvey he's wearing a shirt that says Video Toaster on it.
Really?
Yeah. So he's promoting his brother's product.
That's pretty cool.
When they're at like a Woodstock type event.
Yeah.
So he's wearing. So if you ever watch that again, you'll see Video Toaster on his shirt, and that's what this is.
awesome.
Like, of course, things like the Commodore 64 is probably the most best known classic computer because there was over 30 million of them sold. So it's one of those things where almost anybody that had a computer in the 80s would remember the 64.
Yeah.
And most people played games on it. So a lot of the franchises that we enjoy today, and a lot of the things, like for example, Wolfenstein started out on the 64 and the Apple II back in the day. It's changed a lot, of course. Will Wright, famous for The Sims, he had his first game called Raid on Bungling Bay. Was a simulation game with a city. It was on the Commodore 64. It was actually a game I faked being sick for when I was a kid. I was like, I can't go to school, Mom. And I played Raid on Bungling Bay like the whole day. The older stuff like Urtica, or however we want to say it, Karotica. I used to always say Karotica, but Jordan Mechner, who did the Prince of Persia games, like he did his early start on the 8-bit computer stuff. So he wrote it on the Apple II, but there was, of course, Commodore 64 conversions as well. So, yeah, when people come here, they play. And then the thing is, too, is that there's newer games actually being created for the older platform, just like there is in consoles.
Yeah.
So, for example, Bruce Lee was one of the best 8-bit computer games, so they actually came out with a Bruce Lee 2 recently. Somebody hacked the levels and recreated a new game. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
And then this is our software library. We could actually fill this many, many times now. You'll recognize a lot of classic games out in here. So, whether you talk about the original Atari conversions of, arcade classics like Space Invaders, Galaxian, Defender, Pac-Man, Missile Command, all of those, to some of Electronic Arts' first games, to some of Activision's first games, to companies that are still around today, but they got their start very, very early on. And, of course, went on to produce a lot of computer games. So companies that are no longer with us that were really cool, like Epix, for example, made the Summer Games series, and they were very popular on the Commodore. Pit Stop, Pit Stop 2 was actually one of the first split-screen racing games. And it was just something cool to see the other car, above you, right, and watch it go through. So, and of course, a lot of these games are on 5.25-inch disc, not cartridge. Although we do have cartridges out here as well. Some of the games are even on cassette tape. So they're pretty. We have again posters. We have a poster from The Wizard.
That's awesome.
We have.
I was about to mention that. I was just waiting.
Yeah, somebody actually came up to me at Fan Expo one time when I was presenting with Victor Lucas and Scott Jones from EP, and they come up to me and said, we're in Toronto, we plan on coming out to see your museum, but we were wondering if you wanted this. Didn't know if you had it. And I'm like, I don't have it.
I want it.
So they gave it to me. So
that's awesome.
I had it plaqued, and it's one of our favorite things out here.
That's awesome. What a great
So-
movie. California.
Psygnosis games. Psygnosis was later bought by Sony, but on the Amiga computer, like, their games were the king. Like, if you wanted the best in games, you would get those. And of course, the Cinemaware games were very popular as well. So things like Defender of the Crown, which was actually the first game I ever had on the Amiga, they produced and had the real idea of doing, cinematic games. So they were, the concept of video games as more of a movie with a, beginning, middle, and end, and that kind of thing.
There's an NES
So-
game of that.
Yeah, there's a version of Defender of the Crown and the Three
Yeah,
Stooges.
there's-
Yeah. And again, those all started with the Amiga version. So the ports that were on other systems were all downgrades from the original Amiga version. And so Jim Sachs was the artist on a lot of those games, and he loved the Amiga. That was his platform of choice. And so, there's a lot of software that even produces that stuff. Like, for example, Deluxe Paint would have been, the killer application for the system at that time. And it actually produced a lot of the graphics that are on the Sega Genesis games, or a bunch of the early DOS games as well. Like, consumers are so different today, right? We expect, like, instant response to tech problems and things like that because of things like Twitter, social media, and email. But back in the day when we bought all these things, you'd be lucky if you get a response in 3 months. So it's quite a different world we live in.
It
so,
is. Yeah.
the oldest computer we have is the MSI 8080, and that is from 1976, and it's very similar to the Altair, which is what Bill Gates did the first BASIC on. But
War games, yeah.
yeah, and it was the computer that was featured in one of my favorite films of all time, which is War Games. And although David has like he's snazzy, he's got the 8-inch disk drive hookup, and of course he had some speech synthesizer and stuff. Although of course it was just a prop; it wasn't actually the computer that he was using in the film, but it looks like it was. But the way it was sold, it was only there was no keyboard, there was no screen, so you actually had to do all your input and output via these switches. And then also the screens here. So you imagine you had to program in each and every single byte, 1 bit at a time, put it into, tell it what you want to put in. So this was the address line and the data line. So you had to say, here's the address of where I want something to go, and this is what I want to put in there. And then you would have to program it in. And then the only way you had of outputting the results were the lights. So it was pretty brutal. So one of the early programs was you could actually put 2 numbers in binary, push execute, and the system would add the numbers together and give you the result in binary. So you had to be able to read in binary. But yet, this is the world's lamest calculator at the time. But of course, most of the space inside is open space, so you could put in expansion cards and stuff. So eventually there was improved processors, there was extra RAM, there was, a video display, keyboard, disk drives. So all the stuff that we would enjoy on computers later on were all available to the IMSI because of its design. And it basically was one of the pioneers of something called the S100 standard, which was similar to the way ISA or PCI or those, AGP became on PCs later on. This was a very early standard called the S100. So all these things that have happened in a lot of our lifetimes, like you don't even have to be that old. I mean, I'm 43 and I do remember all of these changes, right? So really in my lifetime, it's been amazing how we've changed, not only in video games and computers, but in other technology as well. So we've always felt it's important to capture some of those moments so that we don't forget, or we can show, the next generation, like show our kids and say, look at this is what mommy and daddy used to do.
Exactly.
So it's pretty cool. And the thing is, it's changing so fast that nobody is thinking about preserving this stuff except for someone like me and my team, because people are just like so disposable with technology, right? It's just like, let's just move on to the next thing.
True.
So
Next upgrade.
it's crazy how fast this stuff gets discarded. So that's one of the reasons I got into collecting computers, because back in the day, like the Commodore 64 and the Commodore line was my thing. The Apple and the Atari, they were like the enemy, right? It's like they were the brand that you didn't get into. But at the same time, I thought, what? I kind of like the Atari. There has some aspect to it. It had games on it that the Commodore didn't have.
Yeah.
So when people started getting rid of those computers, instead of saying meh and turning my back on them, I embraced them because I was like, what? I always wanted one. Now I can buy one cheap, or someone can give it to me because they're throwing it out.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started collecting computers. And, and that's kind of how the collection got started. When we opened this place 10 years ago, I had 85 computers, and now we have over 1,000. So, and so many more have come through, like thousands more have come through the door. Obviously, a lot of them have gone to the computer heaven in the sky.
Yeah.
But we also repurpose computers. We give computers to families that can't afford them, that are still decent computers, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times people get a virus on their computer and they just say, well, instead of spending $150 getting someone to fix it, I'll just put that towards a new one, and they toss their old one.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a couple years old. Computers that are a couple years old are still good. You know, unless there's something physically wrong with them. So that's why we fix them up and give them out, so that people that... or a lot of times we run into a situation where a family maybe has, like, a couple of teenagers, they can only afford one computer, and they're constantly fighting over the computer, which creates real big havoc in the home. So then this way we're happy to provide an extra computer to sort of alleviate some of that pain.
Exactly.
We also have silicon wafers here as well. So this is an example of one. This is an even older one. So although computer microchips have changed and gotten better over the years, they all have started... Whoops, I lost a piece or something. I don't know what the heck that was. They've all started with the same process. So very, very thin sheet of silicon, which is, of course, derived originally from sand. So if you think about it, you've got nothing but sand inside your computer. And so each one of these rectangles inside here represents the tiny little chip that goes in the computer chip that goes inside the computer. And back in the day, the tiny little square chip would have been in the center of this. And all of the connections that go from that chip to the quote-unquote outside world would go to these pins. And then these pins would go on a board, which would then be socketed in or directly soldered into the board itself. And one of the reasons for the size of these things was so that humans could actually work on them. But if you had your cell phone with these kind of chips, it would be like bigger than your head. So now we have robots that actually do the surface mount chips. So the chips are so small that pretty much humans can't even work on them anymore. This is a more modern silicon wafer actually from Intel. So this would have been likely CPU chips. And basically what would happen is initially the process would have lots of flaws. And so with one of these wafers, which are very expensive to produce initially, they might only get, say, a dozen chips out of here that worked. And then as they refined the process and fixed the problems, then they would get what's called a better yield, and then more and more. And that's how prices come down.